Right, morning all. Hope you're all well. Welcome to another session of Help Desk. And today we're specifically looking at chapter number 2, as far as your prescribed textbook is concerned, which also is directly associated with learning unit number 2, as far as module content is concerned. And ultimately, that specific learning unit and chapter is service desk operations. So last week, naturally, we looked at introducing the module and looked at some of the basics associated with the whole concept of help desk. So literally just looking at basic service desk concepts associated with the whole industry at large. So what we want to do today, like I mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, is just look at what are the different types of operations that distinctively exist. And naturally, how we can literally use that acumen to provide for obviously the better service desk environment as far as your setups there would go. So naturally, as far as the actual objectives associated with this particular learning unit and chapter at large is distinctively looking at the whole aspect associated with the different types of service desk environments that exist. Also looking at basic components that are associated with any particular service desk, the basic roles between or the basic roles associated with your internal as well as external service desk. Remember, those are your two main platforms associated with your service desk environments. Also understanding the distinct differences between centralized and decentralized service desks. I think when it comes to your POE as well, the first task should ask you to literally differentiate between these two platforms and provide an understanding of what these particular service desk environments are all about. So it's important to take cognizance of that distinctive fact, and then look at the differences between profit and cost centers when it comes to your service desk environments. I think that's one of the other questions that is relevant or that is asked of you as far as the first task there is concerned, just being able to plug in the right content and not just a question of plugging it in exactly as it is as far as your slides or textbook is concerned, but obviously show an understanding of the actual concepts at large, not forgetting the actual role of outsourcing as far as the support industry there is concerned, and then naturally, in conclusion, just looking at the evolution as far as the basic service desk model there is concerned. So that's what this particular chapter and learning unit is in a nutshell. But again, like I said before, all this acumen just enables you to understand content a bit better and be able to use it in your own professional as well as personal environments in that regard. So when you look at the whole concept associated with obviously customer service and support organizations, what are the different types of service and support organizations that are there, right? And if you look at it from a holistic point of view, it's all about customer satisfaction, right? If you remember in our previous session, we discussed the concept of your service desk being the literally the bottom line of any given business, because that's your first point of contact when it comes to customers and a clientele. So ultimately, the first point of contact is one of the most important aspects in any regard, because like we've mentioned before, that literally can look at diminishing your client base or growing your client base. So remember how customers interact with you, or how with their distinctive experience as far as them calling in, trying to get any particular issue resolved, obviously from a technical platform, how they are treated, or how their basic experience with that whole setup determines them coming back, determines them staying with your brand, staying with a particular service or product, or them referring you to colleagues, friends, family, you name it, or it's the same. The reverse is true. If they get not so appropriate service, then naturally that means that, that reviews are bad in that regard. So it's very important to understand that the type of service desk that you've got literally is directly associated with you growing or diminishing your business. So it's all about customer satisfaction. And I think I've mentioned this before, that yes, the service desk individuals can be technically inclined. They know exactly what's happening with the product, left, right, and center. Same difference with whichever service that is being provided for. But if you don't literally converse or engage with the client or the customer appropriately, then naturally that whole acumen goes down the drain if you look at it from a different perspective. So it's a complete product. You can't be brilliant in just one aspect and not show up in the other. So the way your understanding of the product, your understanding of the service, you being an expert in that particular platform is applicable, and at the same time, it should come hand in hand with you being able to treat your customers accordingly, or you being able to engage with your customers accordingly as far as these particular service desk environments they are concerned. You'll discover that these are it forms part and parcel of skill sets that will also need to be taught to individuals, or literally for how to engage with clients as far as the whole business case there is concerned. So literally about customer satisfaction, and then you'll discover that there obviously are specific services that are literally offered at the operating characteristics of such environments, that obviously would include the type of customer service support organization, the actual size, the basic structure. And obviously these would vary across literally depending on the actual needs of the customers at large. So there's an importance also in understanding what how these types, sizes, and structures would literally also look at effectively providing for the appropriate service desk in those distinctive environments there. So you've got the different types that are there listed at the bottom of that particular slide: your generic call centers, your contact centers, your help desk environments, and distinctively your service desk configurations that are there. So obviously you've got your inbound call centers, for instance, that will distinctively then look at receiving telephone calls from customers and literally may answer questions, distinctively take orders, or respond to billing inquiries, and literally also provide customer support in certain instances. And then you've got outbound call centers that obviously make calls to customers, and more often than not, outbound is really about marketing or trying to boost sales in terms of a specific product or service, whichever way you look at it. So it forms part and parcel of what they call telemarketing, which is literally just selling products or services over the phone in that particular environment. And then you obviously would have blended call centers, right, where you have both the inbound and outbound configurations put in place as far as your particular setups would go. Basic contact centers obviously would refer to a call center that uses technologies that would obviously go beyond just the telephone setup. As far as configurations would go. So whichever type of technology that you're using for your generic call centers, so with the telephone, with your VoIP configurations, with your SIP architectures and so on. With a contact center, you're now throwing in email and obviously chat environments as an addition to your telephone as a basic means of communication in that regard. So you'll discover that major businesses will literally use a call or contact centers, because obviously they need to handle high volume or a high volume of customer contacts, right? So literally, it provides a cost-efficient solution to literally handle these contacts from one or more centralized locations. So obviously, these actual services are delivered by each call center. Would obviously vary accordingly as far as your specific environment there is concerned. So ultimately, if you look at it from an example point of view, what you're distinctively discussing in that regard is, for instance, you find that call centers and contact centers that literally include airline reservations, catalog ordering centers, home shopping centers, and then you also have software publishers and equipment manufacturers such as Dell, for instance, HP, Microsoft, your Apple, that will obviously use these call or contact centers to distinctively provide technical as well as customer support in that regard. So it's something that is imperative in terms of understanding what's happening. So you'll discover that customers are directed to contact a help desk or a service desk for support. May obviously, in fact, reach any analyst who physically resides in that call center or contact center, whichever way you want to look at it in that regard. So the service desk, in essence, literally plays quite a imperative and important role, because when you look at it from again from a holistic point of view, these particular service desk environments literally can be the only points of contact, right? As far as your organizational platforms are concerned. So it literally cannot. It's something that is not independent, because there has to be some kind of integration with already existing platforms as far as your setups there are concerned. So although that particular service desk would play a critical role, like we were mentioning just a couple of seconds ago, it must build positive working relationships with other parts of the organization, right? There has to be some kind of integration, some kind of seamless relationship from a work or professional point of view to ensure, obviously, there is an appropriate service desk environment in that regard. So obviously, as a result, service desks are often structured in a series of levels or lines. And an approach commonly known as multi-level support is incorporated in that particular setup. So multi-level support, right? You'll find that in this particular setup, customers obviously contact the service desk when they are literally unable to resolve certain issues, right? And then that particular service desk would obviously refer these particular issues or problems or incidents, like we mentioned in our previous lecture, these particular incidents that it cannot resolve will obviously be sent to the appropriate internal group, right? So it can either be a specialized part of the service desk or the support a unit that is responsible for dealing with queries that come associated, probably if you look at a network connectivity issue, if it's your router that is giving issues, probably it's a specific brand, probably it's a specific configuration. You've got individuals within your own service desk environments that are responsible for that particular part. But if it's the actual link or line, for instance, the fiber link that is giving you issues there, or is possibly damaged, or is not working appropriately, you've got a separate set of individuals that obviously deal with that. So that's where that multi-level support setup would come from. Or if it's a speed issue, where yes, you've got connectivity, yes, the devices are functioning, but you're getting intermittent speeds that obviously differ from the actual package that you subscribe for. Same difference would apply in that regard. So ultimately, you've got a separate internal group or an external vendor that is obviously an expert in that subject matter, or literally have a separate individual or group of individuals that are obviously experts in that particular matter at hand as far as your setups there would go. So that's what your multi-level support is all about. Just ensuring that you've got specific individuals or specific groups of individuals that strictly deal with specific issues when it comes to your technical environment as far as configured. If you're looking at it from a system perspective, you've got the software part and then you've got the hardware part. For instance, you literally can have individuals that are experts in an actual application package or in an actual even system software at large, right? And then you have individuals that are experts or subject matter experts rather in hardware-based configurations. So it's that's where that multi-level support comes into play. And obviously, remember the subject matter experts, or another acronym associated with SME, is just someone who's got some kind of high-level experience or basic knowledge, or knowledge rather, on a particular subject in that regard. So if you look at it from a diagrammatic point of view there, as far as your multi-level support there is concerned, like we had mentioned before, you've got those incidents that certain service desk environments might not be able to resolve or have fixed. For instance, this is where your different levels of support come into play. So if you look at that particular diagram, you've got and obviously a customer that probably tried to look at self-help mechanisms and still failed to resolve the issue that they were experiencing. Obviously called in or distinctively used the other means of contact as far as your basic service desk or contact center is concerned. Level 1 support might not have been able to distinctively resolve it. They obviously escalated to level 2 support. So these are individuals that would include field services all the way down to your subject matters. So in essence, in this particular group, you've got application, technical, as well as network support. And then lastly, you've got level 3 support now. These are the actual vendors of the software that might be used in that environment, the actual hardware, and again, would also include subject matters in that regard. So ultimately, what you're looking at in this particular instance, with self-help, your customers or your clients would probably be able to resolve certain issues, right? Same difference with level 1. If the customers cannot resolve, they escalate it to level 1. Level 1 resolves it, we're good to go. If not, it's escalated. Level 2 resolves it, we're good to go. If not, then it goes to level 3. So it's not all issues, literally, that have to go through the escalations as far as your particular environments would go. So it's only very intricate problems or core issues that might be experienced with a specific product or service within that technical environment that will obviously need the generic escalation in that regard. That's the reason why we were mentioning in our previous session as well, that when you look at self-help, it literally ends up freeing up enough time and literally resources for the other levels of support that are there in terms of them actually dealing with critical issues, or in terms of them actually dealing with issues that customers might not be able to resolve themselves. So when level 1 supports, when someone or a group of individuals sitting in level 1 support get a mail, get a phone call, get a chat, whichever way you look at it, there's already a general assumption that, okay, look, because we've been contacted, it actually literally means that the customer might not have, or obviously has failed to resolve this on their own. It's something that we need to obviously prioritize if you look at it from a different point of view. Yes, you'll still have certain customers or clients that will still call in for even the simplest of issues, right? But the general assumption is that when someone calls in and there's a self-help platform, it means that they possibly have gone through self-help and literally have failed to resolve their issues on their own and within their own internal structures now. So with the self-help issue, like I mentioned before, yes, you'll still find certain customers not even bothering going through self-help and just making that call to have their issues resolved. More often than not, you'll find that level 1 support will still refer them to the self-help setup, or resolve, and then just give them a heads up to say, okay, look, should you experience such an issue, again, this is you can literally try and resolve it on your own given the self-help platforms that are there. But within the internal infrastructures, right, it's a definite indication that there is critical issues at hand. So within your internal structure, if you look at level 1 support and all the way to level 3, if level 1 contacts level 2 or escalates the issue to level 2, it's an automatic indication that this is a critical issue that could not have been resolved at level 1 within your own internal structures. Same difference would go with level 2 support now escalating whatever issue is being experienced from a technical perspective to level 3. It's an automatic indication that at level 2, there was a discrepancy in terms of them being able to actually properly resolve. So it presents the whole issue of prioritization in that particular instance, that when you're looking at it from an internal perspective, escalations definitely, without fail, mean that there are certain issues that are distinctively critical. You rarely find level 1 support just escalating issues for the fun of it to level 2. The same difference would go with level 2 escalating issues to level 3. There's no you could say nonchalance in that particular instance. What it actually means is that there's critical issues at hand in that regard. So obviously, with the escalation, that just like I was mentioning earlier on, these are terms that you are literally familiar with. Escalation just means to raise an incident from one particular level to the other, and obviously to also look at dedication of new and additional resources to an actual incident. All right, as far as particular configurations there is concerned. So when you look at, as an argument, individuals or group of individuals that are sitting in level 2, they'll look at resolving issues like I was mentioning earlier on that are beyond the scope and literally the authority of level 1. So sometimes it's not just a question of not being able to resolve an issue, but each particular level would have different access to the system or different access to distinctive platforms. What that would mean is you've got rights and permissions, literally, that are associated with each of the different levels. So more often than not, when level 1 escalates to level 2, sometimes it's just an issue of them not being able to access a specific part of the system because they don't have the rights and permissions. And to a certain extent, it's not always that they don't have the technical know-how, but literally probably they don't have the appropriate experience or the understanding of the system at large. That's the reason why you have individuals obviously sitting within the levels of support that are higher than them in that regard. And then when you look at your service desk environment, there's a mission associated there, right? Or your generic mission statements or something to go by to assist with the appropriate resolution of issues or incidents, to assist with the appropriate engagement associated with your clients or customers at large. So in essence, your mission just distinctively describes customers the actual service desk serves, right? The type of customers or the type of service that particular service desk provides, and obviously how that particular desk delivers those services. So it's literally something that just defines who the service desk supports, what it supports, and how it provides that support. So that's literally what a service desk mission is all about. In a nutshell, defining the actual service desk, who the actual service desk supports, defining what it actually supports, defining how it provides that distinctive support in your in your environments, right? So literally, you're looking at two main aspects or two main subdivisions, if you look at it from a different point of view, in terms of these service desks across the board. You've got internal, obviously, versus your external platforms as far as configurations they are concerned. And more often than not, you'll discover that when you discuss and deal with internal service desks, literally you're looking at response to questions, the distribution of information, handling of incidents, and obviously service requests for company employees. So this is a desk that is part and parcel of a specific organization that is there to serve that specific organization as far as your environments there are concerned. So you'll discover that a company can have several types of internal help desks or service desks that obviously employees would distinctively contact for support. And obviously each would have a clearly defined scope of responsibility as far as setup is concerned. So if you look at basic examples, if you're dealing with the HR department, anything to do with medical aid issues, for argument's sake, is going to be dealt with by the HR department, right? Because it's something that sits within that specific environment as far as your configurations they are concerned. And obviously, when you're looking at IT, when you're looking at probably facilities, right? Anything to do with the office space, anything to do with furniture, anything to do with just your office fixtures in general is obviously going to be dealt with by the facilities department. So that's another example of a setup in that regard. And then obviously with IT, I think that is a given. Anything to do with hardware and software, connectivity issues in connectivity, installations, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, is obviously associated with them in that regard. So that is the essential aspect associated with your internal service desk environments as far as configurations will go. So you'll discover that most IT departments, right, will literally need to function as internal service desks. So there's a difference there, because an IT department was just initially there to look at ensuring everything functions without issues, to ensure that software, hardware is installed accordingly, network connectivity is provided for without precedent or with minimal issues. As far as particular setup is concerned, IT was also responsible for procurement when it comes to any ICT equipment at large. But ultimately, you'll discover that most of these departments, if not all of them now, as far as IT departments are concerned, will obviously also need to function as internal service providers, right? And what that means is that you're literally looking at supplying information, products, or services to another department or individual that is within the same company. Right. So initially, just the whole concept of procurement, setting up, installation, you name it. But now these particular departments are also supposed to act as internal service providers by providing basic information that is relevant from an IT or ICT point of view is concerned. Also looking at providing the whole concept of basic products and services to either another department in that same organization or company, or another individual within that same organization or company in that regard. So obviously, you've got schedules associated with these particular services. You also have the quality associated with these particular services as far as your particular setups they are concerned. So it's important to take consideration in that aspect. So I think this just reiterates what we were mentioning a couple of moments back, where we were saying your internal service desk, obviously within the actual organization at large, and ultimately the reverse is true when you're discussing your external service desk environments, that it literally supports individuals who buy a company's product or who buy a company's service in that regard. So you'll discover that internal service desks literally may provide some semblance of support directly to the company's external customers also, such as obviously technical support for that particular company's website, for instance, or proprietary software as far as configurations would go. And literally in this particular capacity now, what it would mean is this particular internal service desk is now acting as a blended service desk, which literally looks at servicing both your company's individuals or departments, as well as the client at large. That's what a distinctive blended service desk is all about in that regard. So revisiting again what we were mentioning early on, why the initial IT departments or ICT rather departments were set up initially as far as configurations would go, and obviously now what they distinctively provide for as far as a particular setup would go. So if you look at I think the third bullet point there, you're looking at the procurement issues we were discussing earlier on, and then as well as just ensuring that it should obviously acknowledge that it's a customer service organization that literally is supposed to then provide a high level of service as far as your basic customers they are concerned. So literally a service desk would be that, again, single point of contact, which is important in that regard. So regardless of you dealing with customers or regardless of you dealing with your colleagues, you still need to ensure that the service that is appropriately provided is appropriate, and ultimately that presents for business continuity, right? So if you're not clued in certain areas, that can be a bit detrimental in terms of ensuring that your customers have the smoothest type of experience when it comes to your ICT environments. I think most of us can attest to this, that you don't always get the best of colleagues, right? And I think there's always a general misconception that IT is supposed to work some kind of magic, right? So if you work in an IT department, or if you literally look at you being within an internal service desk environment, your colleagues or the individuals that are working within your organization expect you to work some kind of magic. So if there's no internet connectivity, they expect that the moment they come in and state their case that, listen, I'm not able to connect to the internet, they expect that by the time they finish that sentence, automatically the internet should be up and running. I'm sure it's that most of you experience. I'm hoping that none of you are those characters that go up to the IT department and expect them to work some kind of magic when it comes to. Yes, obviously, I understand that it's frustrating in certain instances where you're trying to make a call over your VoIP architectures. There's no internet connectivity there. You're trying to send someone an email. You're trying to send a report. You're trying to engage with your clients and whatnot, and then connectivity is intermittent in that regard. Obviously, there's that frustration, but it's important to understand that stating your case does not mean it's automatically the IT chaps or the IT department would then kind of click their fingers and automatically internet connectivity is restored, right? But it's still important to understand that if you're within the IT department, you're vital in that aspect to ensure that your colleagues have a smooth experience when it comes to technology in that regard. So it's not just a connectivity issue, but obviously softwares that might need to be used, the actual hardware that is incorporated in that regard needs to function without precedent. That's single point of contact. So you're again comes back to what I think we're going to be discussing this, I think across all learning units really, to say that yes, while you might be an expert in that subject matter, you might be an expert in that particular environment, it's still important to understand that you need to engage with your colleagues appropriately or professionally, if you want to look at it from a different. I think there's a misconception that you are forced to like your colleagues or to literally host parties with your colleagues. That's not what is being advocated for here. But professionalism is key. And when you're being professional, it means that whoever you've provided a service to walks away satisfied. So it's always important to understand that we can't even call level of professionalism. We're just going to say professionalism at large. It's all about ensuring that whoever you deal with, whether it's a client or a colleague, when they're done with you or when you're done with them, they walk away satisfied with whatever service you've given them. So there's always that misconception that you have to literally like your colleagues. It's about being professional, and being professional is not just making sure that your shirt is ironed, right? It's just ensuring that whatever service you provide for is satisfactory when it comes to clients and colleagues at the end of the day. So with incidents, one of the aspects that you need to take into consideration here is literally take ownership of issues that take place. And taking ownership is just literally just means that you're tracking the incident to ensure that the customer is kept informed, and literally that information or them being informed is about the status of their particular incident, that the actual incident is resolved within the expected time frame, and obviously the customer is satisfied, again, like we mentioned a couple of seconds ago, with the final resolution. I think one of the worst things that as customers or clients we literally can experience is when we call in to get something resolved, or when we contact our providers to get something resolved, we don't get any feedback. Right. I think one of the worst things is to have to constantly call back to say, listen, I'm still not able to watch this specific channel, or I'm still not being able to get the distinctive speed that I need when it comes to my internet connectivity, or I'm still not getting what I'm supposed to get from the software that I've bought or installed as far as your particular institution there is concerned. So having to call multiple times to have the same issue resolved is can be very frustrating, and again, like I was mentioning at the beginning of the session, can derail the whole issue of your client base when it comes to the image associated with the actual organization or institution, right? So you want something that is seamless, that yes, while you've got a discrepancy in terms of your connectivity, you've called in and literally you've got a specific individual that has literally taken ownership of that incident. That is your single point of contact now, that literally that particular individual is the one that is then calling you to provide feedback, to say, listen, we've just identified that there's been a break in the cable, or that we've identified that there's been some kind of discrepancy when it comes to our own infrastructure, or when it comes to your particular location. We're working on resolving this. We expect this to be resolved in whatever time frame. And when that time frame either expires or literally is near, they give you a heads up again. Listen, we are now at the specific this and that, and we're literally resolving it, or we've resolved it, whichever way. Can you please test? Are you still experiencing the same issues? If not, good to go. And so that provides some kind of seamless way in which a service is provided for. Right, but the moment you end up calling, right, you speak to a certain somebody today, probably no feedback is given. You have to call again tomorrow or after a couple of hours. You speak to a different individual that is now responsible for that particular issue. Again, same difference applies. The next day, you're experiencing the same issue. You now have another individual that is responsible for it. It becomes quite cumbersome, and obviously, I think if you're the ones that are providing the service, or you're the ones that are within the service desk, it also does not look professional in that regard, because it seems as if no one actually knows what they're doing in that environment. So it's very important to have, and not just from an external and internal service desk environment, I think within both platforms, to have a specific individual that owns an incident, and from the time it's reported to the time it's resolved. And that creates some kind of seamless way in working with anything. And remember, it's not just within the service. In any type of industry, when you're looking at getting some kind of service and you deal with one individual, it makes it a lot easier, because at the end of the day, you end up creating that customer a relationship as well with that specific individual. They obviously know your issue, and it becomes something. It becomes more personal, just than you being another number when it comes to individuals that have either bought or used a specific product or service in that regard. So it's very important to take cognizance of that distinctive fact in that regard. So obviously, some additional service desk activities would obviously look at the training. And then again, the training is not just for the product or the service, but the training as well is also looking at the whole issue associated with how to deal with these clients as well. So this is also something that you need to take into consideration in that regard. Obviously, your network and system administration, and then fulfilling multiple requests that literally are there. And then remember, it's all about ensuring that you resolve a much larger percentage of any reported incidents at the first point of contact, which means that you minimize escalations. So when someone calls in, got an issue and so on, the best thing that can be resolved, that you can look at, is having that resolved there and then. And when I mean there and then, I'm not talking about the magic. I was illustrating a little early on, but I'm looking at you, the first point of contact being the individual or the group of individuals that deal with that issue at that particular point in time, without having the need to literally look at escalation. Because remember, the moment you escalate, time is of the essence in that regard, even if it is necessary. We always tend to forget that now means that the customer or the client has to wait an additional time to get their issue resolved in that regard. And I think most of us have experienced this, right? It's frustrating for you to actually call in and have issues just escalated willy-nilly in certain instances. You expect that the moment whoever it is that you get at the end of the line, or at the end of that chat, or at the end of that email, is the individual that actually resolves your distinctive issue at large there. And this presents something quite interesting, right? Which is in certain instances, when it comes to, again, not just internal, but both as well as external service desk environments, there's quite an interesting document that is known as the SLA, or Service Level Agreement. And what this does, it helps manage customer expectations, right? So if you are looking at that internal IT department setup, you've got a document that you literally create, or that has been created, that will state that, okay, look, if you're looking at a specific type of issue, we expect to resolve that issue within a distinctive time frame, right? So it makes it simple for both the individuals that are requiring the service and the individuals that are providing the service in terms of proper resolution in that regard. So if we're saying that your connectivity could be resolved, or we're saying that a new installation of a software package, or an installation of a hardware component, depending, should not take more than 3 hours, just as an argument. We already know that, okay, look, that particular component is there. Installation of this it should not take more than the distinctive time frame. If it's not, then we have to go through the process of having to procure it first. Procurement can take anything up to 7 days, for argument's sake. After that, then look at installation once it's been delivered. These particular statements, these particular agreements, these particular you could say conditions, right? Make it a lot easier for management of expectations from both parties, right? And it also enables your service desk to know where it ends, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, where it would need to then say, okay, look, we can only provide the service up until this point. After this, probably we now need to get an external vendor, or we now need to get a third-party environments involved in that regard. And it also helps managing relationships between that internal desk I was talking about, or internal IT department or providers, as well as the actual customers there, and also looks at that particular balance, obviously, of demands. With the costs associated with demand. And it's very important to understand that an SLA is not a legal, it's not a contract. It's just a statement that is there that is an agreement between two parties to say, okay, look, I've got you as an individual, or as a department that is supposed to be providing a service. This is what we literally agree on. Obviously, it's signed on as far as this particular document is concerned in most instances. But it's an agreement that states that, okay, look, if I've got an issue like this, you've agreed that you'll resolve this issue in this particular manner, or within this particular time frame, whichever way it is. If you fall outside the confines of that, then it means that obviously there's a discrepancy in quality there when it comes to providing a specific setup that is there. So literally, it's you'll discover that most of these particular internal desks would operate in an informal fashion. But the problem with that is that there's no way of properly managing expectations in that regard. So today, you walk into the IT office, you ask for them to create an email for a new user, for instance, and just because there's that IT office at that particular point in time is not busy, they sort you out in the next 5 minutes. The next time you come in, what that means is when you walk away from that desk, or when you put that phone down, or when that particular issue is resolved, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, your expectation now is that, okay, look, anytime I walk to the IT office for a new email to be set up, I expect it to be done in 5 minutes, because that's what you experience, right? But the next time you pop in there, the IT office is busy, or there's no one in the IT office, just for argument's sake, and you now are frustrated because in your mind, or in your experience, this particular issue that you want resolved initially took 5 minutes before, right? But that's what happens when you don't have any formal processes put in place. But if you've got a formal kind of procedure, you already have a way of properly managing those expectations, right? And again, should you then fall outside the confines of those of that particular setup, then it's something that needs to be redressed in that regard. So it's important to understand it from that particular point as far as your setups there are concerned. So obviously, your SLA becomes something that provides for a formal type of a process, or formal type of setting as far as your configurations there would go. And then you obviously have the opposite of what we were just discussing, which is your external service desk. And again, like we mentioned a couple of slides prior, that this particular desk deals with clients or customers who literally buy a product or a distinctive service. So obviously, services provided would include the whole issue of pre and post sales support. So if it's pre-sales, you want to understand exactly what this particular product does, what are its capabilities, does it actually meet your distinctive requirements? Is that the actual a product that is relevant or is appropriate for your environment, right? And then after installation, after acquisition, and so on, you also will still need some kind of support after, right? That would make usage of that particular product or service a lot more fluid if you look at it from a different point of view. And obviously, it literally varies by industry and by the actual role of the service desk that you've got in that environment. So most of these desks now, this is where that profit and cost center situation comes in, that you'll discover that most of these external service desks would literally contribute to that corporate growth we were mentioning a couple of moments ago, by literally looking at capturing and sharing customer feedback with other groups within your environments, and obviously building the customer relationships. Like I was mentioning earlier on, that's one of the most important aspects when it comes to your service desk environments, because of that single point of contact we've mentioned and we've been mentioning a couple of times now. That if you've got an appropriate relationship with your customers, growth is inevitable if you want to look at it from a different point of view, because most businesses are grown through just referrals. Most businesses are grown through your basic reviews. I think we've used this example before, that most of us might have chosen either to buy or utilize, buy a product or service, or utilize a product or service just from referrals from either family or friends or colleagues, positive referrals, right? Or I've chosen to drop or not engage with certain products or services just because of certain reviews, either that you might have read online or that you might have gotten from, again, a first-hand experience from your colleagues, your friends or family in that regard. That's why it's very important to ensure that you have the appropriate image, especially when you're looking at it from external service desk environments that provide for that growth that is necessary. So to obviously look at something that you could say gauges the actual way in which customers are being engaged with, or to look at the way in which customers are responding to the level of service that you're getting when it comes to the product or service. Most organizations out there will now deal with CRM systems. And then remember, CRM is your customer relationship management environments that will show exactly what is happening within your environments, and ultimately look at if there's a need, possibly look at changing the way in which they provide a specific part, or look at continuing in that particular aspect if you're obviously getting a positive setup in that regard. So what these particular CRMs or customer relationship management systems or platforms would do is look at just it involves using customer contact and relationship information to literally generate more sales and to increase levels of customers service and retention in that aspect. Remember, I think there's a misconception again in terms of the growth of a business. It's not just getting new clients, right? But it's also ensuring that you maintain the ones you already have, right? I think that's one of the biggest things in this regard. That when you look at the whole concept of your businesses growing and so on, it's just as important in terms of getting new clients is just as important as retaining already existing. If possibly, if you want to even look at it from a different point of view, maintaining the ones that you already have is possibly even more important than gaining new clients. And you normally find that most organizations out there are very big on getting new clients, and they tend to forget that retaining the ones that you initially had or the ones that you already have is just equally important, if not more, when it comes to sustenance of the actual business at large in that regard. So
these service desks, again, it's important to understand the sizes, right? What type of equipment, what type of technology, what type of architectures you're putting in place that are literally determined by the generic sizes of your service desk. This also looks at appropriate management as well. So the smaller the service desk, if you're looking at management platforms, is not literally equivalent to the larger the service desk. So normally you have your small, your medium, and your large service desk environments. And what you're looking at in this particular instance is the actual staff contingent across these different sizes, the technology that is used. And remember, when you set up a service desk, it's not just about techno, right? I think there's, again, a misconception that, okay, look, if you're setting up a service desk, especially from an IT setup, it's just a question of someone having their desktop or their laptop, internet connectivity, set of headsets, for instance, for argument's sake, and then we're good to go. But we tend to forget that there's the actual setup of that particular service desk or office, depending on the size. So you still have to incorporate furniture. You still have to incorporate such environments as, or such components as your HVAC. Remember, your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning still needs to be taken into consideration. You still have to look at where it's located. Is it centrally located? The list will go on and on in that regard. So it's always important to understand that your basic service desks are not just technology, but also looking at everything that works around that technology being appropriate in that regard as well. So you've got the whole issue of the actual size of these particular desks identified by or determined by the actual mission at large, and as usual, literally the scope of responsibilities. Right? What is this particular desk supposed to be providing for, as far as your environments would go? So you've got your small, normally arranging between 1 to 10 individuals. Your large, obviously, vary in size depending on whether they are internal or external as far as configurations they are concerned. But normally you find that you're sitting with about more than 25 individuals as far as your staff contingency is concerned. So 1 to 10 are normally associated with your small, 10 to about your 25. That would be your minimum. Sorry, your medium rather, and then your large would then be anything more than 25 as far as your particular setups there would go. But obviously, characteristics of both small and large are associated with your medium service desk environments as far as your particular setup is concerned. Typical example of what a small service desk would be can be just one individual associated with your environment. Obviously, that would mean that the section or what they are literally servicing is a very small environment. So just one particular desk is or one particular individual rather within that environment is applicable. But you've got obviously basic advantages and disadvantages in that regard. So what do you have as far as your small service desk environment? If you're looking at the pros or if you're looking at the advantages in that regard, obviously you can have environments where it literally enables people to know the actual customer and understand their needs at large. Looking at gratifying to individuals that are highly motivated, individuals that are capable of managing stress, individuals that are organized. I think that's one of the things that is also thrown out there. I think willy-nilly in certain instances, this whole issue of management of stress and so on. It's quite interesting because certain individuals actually think it's some kind of skill set or something that you're supposed to be literally born with. So it's quite interesting when you get certain these particular terms or connotations from a different point of view. But ultimately, that's what you're looking at in terms of the actual advantages in that regard. And obviously, kind of offers some kind of opportunity as far as performance of diverse tasks there is concerned, and obviously enables you to get much broader a set of skills. If you're looking at just one individual as providing for that particular service desk, there's so many requests that come from all over when it comes to your organization in terms of configuration and so on. So it enables you to actually become more creative, enables you to get a much better skill set or broader skill set. If you look at it from a different point of view, you literally can become a jack of all trades in that setup. But then obviously you've got the appropriate disadvantages or cons there. And I think if you look at the last point of the disadvantages or cons section there, that informality I was talking about earlier on, that can be very detrimental. Remember, in informal setup, has its advantages as well, right? You don't have to go through all the red tape, arguably. But the biggest issue there is that most of our colleagues don't know where to draw the line when it comes to the expectations when it comes to the ICT space, especially. Like I was just mentioning earlier on, that when it's informal, you pop into the IT office, you ask for something, or you require a certain service, it's granted to you, right? In again, like I was saying earlier on, in the fastest of ways in that particular instance, possibly because there's no one else who's got issues that need to be resolved, right? And again, like I was saying, you walk away with an expectation, right? But that's informal. The next time you've got the same issue, you expect it to be resolved in the way it was at the first time you experienced it, or the first time you had distinctive issues. And it causes a bit of a problem when either that individual is not present or is not available, or is swamped with work at that particular point in time. They can't assist you immediately. Automatically now, it's as if you're not getting quality service. Because you've got some kind of informal setup that was initially incorporated there. So it's important to have some kind of formality, that to have certain rules and procedures that are followed, or a certain set of just generic steps that need to be taken into consideration when providing for a distinctive service in that regard. So you've got people dependent, so obviously may be affected when people leave or are not present, like I was saying earlier on. And then they're difficult to provide, obviously, the adequate training, because you've got this particular individual literally servicing almost everyone in that office environment, and it makes it very difficult to provide for training, because it's not just the type of training that needs to be provided for, but ultimately the time. Because if these guys are not at their desk in a small environment, then ultimately it can literally derail everything. So that becomes quite problematic in terms of how do you then schedule the appropriate training that does not affect them providing the service within your particular office space organization, and obviously might not obviously have the appropriate tools to enable them to get knowledge or information associated with specific environments there. And then obviously a typical example of what a large service desk would look like, we're talking about anything more than 25 setups that are there in terms of individuals, in terms of the actual number at large. This one now, if you look at most of the disadvantages, that it again, that stress we were talking about earlier on comes in as far as this setup there is concerned. And obviously it can literally be extremely performance oriented, because you've got certain time frames. This is where those SLAs we're talking about can be a bit problematic. They're still necessary and relevant, rather, but it can cause, it can be a double-edged sword scenario. And obviously may lack some kind of discipline that a larger workforce would distinctively need. That's the reason why it's important to literally break it down into smaller teams that can be managed by a team leader or an individual that is there as a supervisor to ensure that the appropriate service is granted. But obviously with the advantages, you've got the ability to obviously work as a team. So obviously you can share work across. It makes for better management of incidents. and resolution thereof. And then naturally, training and advancements can be offered accordingly without any disruptions as far as service there is concerned, and obviously enables individuals to now specialize in a specific part of a product or service that subject expert can then just again, like we were mentioning earlier on, be a jack of all trades when it comes to your particular setup, and obviously exposure to a multitude of tools that are out there as far as your particular configurations would go. So now when you look at the structure, so that's just generically talking about sizes, but you've got structures as well that you need to take into consideration when you discuss these particular service desks. Now, when you look at your structures, literally, you've got your centralized versus your decentralized setups. And then when you're discussing centralized service desks, literally you're providing your customers or your clientele with that single point of contact for support services we're talking about earlier on. And more often than not, you'll discover that customers would obviously appreciate that particular approach because naturally, obviously, they do not have to determine who to call within a specific company, right? And then on the other hand, when you deal with decentralized service desk environments, and literally now you're looking at multiple service desk environments that are out there that would be there to literally try and provide a high level of support to customers with obviously specific needs within your particular setup. So when service desks are distinctively, well, the services are distinctively decentralized, you'll find that procedures or technology literally must direct customers to the appropriate service desk, right? And that means that you've got different sections that are specific when it comes to providing a specific service within your environments as far as your particular setup there is concerned. So ultimately, it supports specific products or customer communities. Right? That's what your decentralized platforms they are all about. While your centralized looks at that single point of contact for literally everything as far as basic environments there are concerned. So it's important, again, like I was saying, to just get an understanding of what is happening as far as these particular service desk structures they are concerned. I think one of the interesting ones when it comes to centralized service desk environments is the virtual service desk, which literally gives the impression of a centralized desk by using telephone systems and the internet, so sophisticated telephone systems and the internet, where in reality the service desk analysts may be located in a number of locations, including their homes, right? I think now it's even more prevalent with COVID, right, or with the pandemic, that most of these individuals now are not literally sitting in a physical office, but literally just providing for services from home in their platform. But it's possible by using the appropriate technology at large. So this is part and parcel of what your virtual service desk is all about. You call in, but the traditional setup that we are literally accustomed or used to is not the same, where you've got individuals, like I said before, that could be working from different locations and their homes being part and parcel of that in that regard. So when you look at analysts in a single location for your centralized and then decentralized, you've got local service desks and then regional service desks in that particular setup. And then naturally, when you're looking at what these particular decentralized or centrally decentralized service desks are concerned, you'll find that associated with much larger companies, looking at customers contacting that central desk first, looking at customers not having to determine what particular service desk to call in that particular instance. as far as your particular configuration there is concerned. So naturally, the basic process of determining a customer's need and routing that particular customer to the appropriate support desk is known as a triage. So this is just ensuring that you send the appropriate customer to the right service desk to have them have their issues resolved accordingly without distinctive problems in that regard. And then this is one thing that is also imperative for us to remember and understand, which is the whole concept of differentiating between your cost center and profit center, right? So in essence, you could find that, again, like we mentioned before, in terms of setup and configuration and technology at large, service desks can literally cost organizations considerable amounts of money. So from an economic point of view, can be detrimental. And this, regardless of the actual size and structure, these particular desks obviously would need a lot of resources, especially from a technological aspect, as far as configurations they are concerned. So these particular service desks, like we mentioned, can be cost centers or profit centers that literally pay for expenses associated with the organization at large. Now, if you look at basic expenses I was talking about earlier on, that when you're setting up a service desk, it's not just your technology that is relevant in that regard. So if you've got the computer system, you've got the actual software installed, you've got additional hardware that is necessary, you still need to consider, for instance, internet connectivity, right? That's all part and parcel of another expense that needs to be thrown into that aspect. And we've talked about the total cost of ownership as well, when it comes to just your computer system. If you look at it from a different perspective, that walking into a store and coming out with a computer system does not mean you're done when it comes to the cost associated with that particular gadget. You walk into a store, you buy a laptop, for argument's sake. I think we've mentioned this before. For about 5K, you come out, you still need to look at subscription for antiviral packages. You need to look at licensing for application packages. You still need to look at your internet connectivity, right? So that's something that you obviously pay for, again, possibly on a monthly basis as well. And then you also need to distinctly look at other gadgets. So probably you need to then buy your external mouse, for instance, for ease of usage. You now need to look at possibly obtaining a set of headsets. The list will go on and on in terms of what you need. So this is a typical example of what you're looking at. So you've got the technology, but you still have to incorporate training as well. You still have to look at the whole issue of basic furniture, like we were talking about early on. You'll obviously look at basic facilities. So just the basic setup of the office space where this particular service desk is supposed to be sitting in is a classic example of what these particular expenses are all about. And obviously you still have to pay for utilities, right? So if you sit within an office space, you need to still pay for water and lights in that particular environment, probably still pay for rent as well if the building is not yours. So it's important to understand that there's a whole host of expenses associated with any basic or a generic service desk environment there. And when you're looking at it as a cost center, right, what it typically means that these particular budget items are literally required to run the actual service desk and are considered as a cost or an expense to the company, right? And literally, it's the cost center's main purpose is, or one of its main objectives, is to minimize or eradicate or eliminate completely the actual expenses associated with your setup. So it can result in what they call hidden costs, which is obviously loss of productivity. If you lose productivity, obviously you lose revenue, right? You've got the peer-to-peer support. And it literally looks at reducing the need to track expenses in a detailed manner, and ultimately market services and generate new customers in that regard. So to look at controlling costs, you might find that many of these particular types of service desks will then obviously limit services, right? And either support only certain products or services, or literally limit the hours. I think you've noticed that you get certain call center environments or certain support that is provided 24/7 in certain instances and industries. Others would say 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 from Monday to Friday, for argument's sake. This is a typical example of limiting the number of hours associated with providing for that distinctive service in that regard. And then again, when you're looking at it as a profit center now, so that's cost, profit. What you're looking at in that regard is now covering the expenses and literally making a bit of a profit by distinctively charging a fee to provide that service at large. So whatever fee you're looking at, literally directly associated with the actual cost associated with the company to provide the services, obviously, plus a basic profit margin, naturally. I think in this particular instance, you're looking at businesses obviously there to make money, right? So there has to be some kind of profit margin, but again, within a reasonable capacity as far as particular setups there is concerned. So when you look at internal service desks environments, ultimately you're looking at fees that would obviously cover standard services, and some departments would literally look at additional premium services. It all depends in your specific environments there. Same difference applies with your external service desk scenarios, that you've got free services and then you've got fee-based standard services, and then you've got premium services in that regard. So I think we've all experienced that at some particular point in time, where if you need additional service for a specific package or for a specific product or for a specific service, you need to literally pay a little bit extra to get that dedicated service in that regard. So that's the whole concept that you find there. So in these particular environments, you find that both are under literally a pressure to ensure that this controlling of costs. And if you look at the first bullet point, the penultimate point underneath there, the charging of premium services for just a specific customized services. So whenever you want something that's outside the standard confines, obviously then you're looking at paying for that. But you also need to ensure that those premium services don't literally for lack of a better expression, discriminate against other clients, right? So you want to avoid, you want to still show some kind of inclusion as far as everyone else is concerned, but ultimately just looking at very specific or very customized type of services that other clients or other customers would then need to literally pay for in that regard. But again, like we've mentioned before, just needs each particular individual to appreciate that whatever they do is, again, comes back to that bottom line we're talking about early on, in terms of ensuring the appropriate image or maintaining some level of professionalism in that regard. And then obviously, I think one of our last sections there is looking at the whole concept of outsourcing as far as your setups there is concerned. And obviously this, as the name would say, just having services provided for by someone outside the confines of your organization. And normally you've discovered that most of the outsourcing associated with most business environments can be used to obviously reduce the costs of implementing your own service desk environment. Also looking at basic efficient use of resources at some particular point in time. And then you can find that contracts are literally used to determine the actual services that the supplier would distinctively provide in that regard. So obviously, when it becomes contractual, it means that there's some semblance of responsibility, maybe if you want to look at it from a different point of view, that is associated with that specific setup in that regard. So that's what your generic outsourcing environments there are all about. Just a reduction of costs, more efficient use of resources, looking at enabling existing resources to literally focus on core competence of the actual business, which is obviously some kind of primary purpose in that regard, and obviously having your contracts work accordingly in that distinctive aspect. So you'll find that it's not a permanent strategy, right? And the same thing, it's not an all or nothing type of business strategy that you find as far as generic outsourcing platforms there are concerned. And you find that when it was initially introduced or initially coined, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, most organizations did not understand the actual internal costs. All right, there were no mechanisms put in place to have some kind of standardization across in terms of understanding the costs at large. And also, you find that there was that thought of that them being able to just wash their hands of service-related problems, and obviously not understanding that, again, to a certain extent, outsourcing can also add another layer of complexity in certain instances as far as your business organization platforms there are concerned. So that's the reason why initially that particular setup kind of failed in that regard. All right. Outsourcing, if you look at it from precedents there, small to medium-sized organizations are roughly about 14%. So this is what one of the research platforms that was done, I think, back in 2012, really, as far as 2012, 2011, there, just to look at the percentage of companies that outsource service desk activities. So small, we're looking at about 14%, large organizations are 32%, and then you obviously have the whole issue of again, your the top 5 services that were initially outsourced. Again, back in 2012, the after hours, you got hardware and repair support all the way to out of the country support, and those were the percentages associated with your specific setup that is there. So the top the 5 were after hours, hardware support and repair, support center staff, software application support naturally, and then out of country support. And those were the distinctive percentages associated in that distinctive instance. And then the actual still dwelling on the whole concept of your outsourcing, looking at some of the reasons why certain companies do not outsource more of these service desk activities. You've got quality, you've got security issues, you've got control of the actual service, and customer acceptance and legal requirements. And so the whole host of issues there that were distinctively problematic in terms of why most of organizations and institutions choose not to outsource in that regard. So support staff morale, service quality, security issues, legal requirements, and control of service all the way up to about 50.9% there, which is quite a chunk when it comes to the overall aspect of configurations there at large. All right, and then obviously the basic engagement in terms of your outsourcing. Suppliers obviously now literally monitoring contact volumes proactively, obviously to notify companies if these particular volumes are either higher than usual or approaching a predefined threshold as far as basic supply there is concerned. And then naturally you find that most of the suppliers that are out there are literally also looking at the whole concept of incident prevention and services at large in that regard. All right, and then with the role issue, you'll discover that you're sitting with suppliers offering obviously a variety of service across the board, all the way to a lot of institutions, organizations that are looking at understanding now that there's some kind of measure that is put in place to actually manage the supplier's performance in that regard. So again, quite problematic when it comes to the actual charges that are associated with the whole concept of outsourcing, because remember, you have to accommodate for that particular additional service that is incorporated in that regard. Obviously, success and profitability are literally directly in line with the quality of the service that your particular staff in that service desk supplier environment is concerned. So many suppliers carefully screen applicants and obviously provide for extensive training. That's the reason why most of the time you call in, you speak to someone who's clued in terms of the actual service or product that is being provided for, and it makes a lot of that particular engagement a lot easier and more comfortable to a certain extent. So obviously you also need to have measurable indicators that are spelled out in the contracts. This is why the contracts become quite important, because you're looking at, again, something that is binding in terms of providing certain qualities and levels of that particular support there is concerned at large. All right. And then I think one of the last sections there, just looking at, again, that service desk model, basically being fueled by the number of organizations that are adopting that library, or that standard we were talking about earlier on in our previous lecture, that kind of looks at standardizing content across as far as your particular setups and configurations there would go. So this is just generically looking at the whole concept of what is happening with your service desk model at large as far as configurations would go. I think you can always look at this particular section again once I upload these particular slides on your portal for you to understand exactly what's going on in that regard. So especially when you're looking at what's happening with what this particular service desk setup enables for, that broader set of services, faster delivery, streamlined processes that obviously reduce a lot of handoffs, reduce of your costs, and ultimately looking at delivery of services that more efficiently and cost efficient when it comes to your clients at large. That's what your generic setup there would look like in terms of what is happening with your basic service desk model, understanding the customer's service desk, and obviously looking at the whole concept of importance of training, importance of field services, importance of proactive work at large as far as your particular environments there are concerned. So I think that should be that for us in this particular aspect. Let's see if we sorted in that regard. All right, so any questions, contributions, or concerns? Let's see if we can. All right, so you can post on the chat there, or unmute your mic and state your case. Any questions on this in terms of what is happening as far as your environments they are concerned? Any questions or contributions when it comes to the actual operations generically associated with the service desk at large there? Any questions, contributions, or concerns from anyone there? Any questions, contributions, or concerns from anyone? Alrighty, so I think that should do that for us. Okay, something has just come through here. Yes, it is. If I understood your question correctly there, Heinrich, you're mentioning that the redirection of the redirection of or redirected to the same support there. Once if something has been resolved prior or previously without precedent, yes, there's literally nothing wrong with that. I think what that does is actually it makes it a lot faster, literally, in terms of resolution of that particular issue. So yes, that is distinctively possible. Does that answer your question there? All right, sorted. Any other questions or contributions or concerns from anyone? Any other questions, contributions, or concerns? All right, so I think that does that for us as far as this particular session there is concerned. Please look through that chapter 2 as well, as far as your prescribed texts would go. Like I said before, I'll upload these particular slides a little later on, and then you can also go through that particular content. Should you get any questions later on, feel free to pop me a mail. We should be good to go in that regard. But otherwise, if there are no questions, I think we're sorted. Let's convene a little later on. I think our next session should be in about an hour or so. Let's get our coffees, get our teas, get out the blankets, and get sorted. All right, so let's convene again in the next hour for network architecture, and then we'll take it from there. Otherwise, see you in a bit. Cheers.